The sun glared down on the ochre sands of Varnock 7, casting long shadows from the jagged rock formations that surrounded outpost Omega like the remnants of some long-forgotten civilization. The sky was a deep, endless blue, and a dry wind carried the tang of rusted metal and scorched earth. Lieutenant Aria Kim stepped off the drop shuttle with a disciplined gait, her boots crunching against the gravel as the landing pad hissed behind her. She blinked through the heat shimmer, trying not to let the weight of alien eyes unsettle her. She was the only human on this outpost. She'd known that before accepting the assignment, but it hit differently now, with the eyes of the garrison boring into her. Xanti, with their translucent skin and shimmering neural crests, Brocker towering with plated arms crossed in suspicion, Solari in pale armor that seemed more ceremonial than practical. None of them greeted her. Protocol dictated a welcome officer, even for junior staff, but no one moved. Behind her, a low growl reverberated through the air. Kael stepped off the shuttle, his massive frame dwarfing hers. The wolf's dense gray coat bristled in the desert wind, his amber eyes sweeping across the silent ranks with unspoken challenge. The growl was not directed at anyone in particular. It was instinct, a predator's expression of awareness. He was leashed only in appearance. The carbon weave tether that ran from his vest to Aria's gauntlet was ceremonial, not functional. Kael followed no one but her. The Brocker were the first to react. Their ranks shifted, a few stepping back imperceptibly, their nostrils flaring. One muttered something in their gravelly tongue. Aria didn't need a translator to know. They recognized something primal in Kael, something they had not expected to find tethered to a human. Lieutenant Aria Kim, she said, voice steady, raising her arm in salute toward the outpost command structure. A Xanti officer stepped forward with visible reluctance. His translucent skin pulsed with a dim blue light, a signal of tension or discomfort, if she remembered the cultural brief correctly. "You are late," he said, voice smooth and motionless. "Your arrival was not necessary." With respect, Commandant Zeros, the Concord's orders were explicit. Varnock 7 is to host a full-spectrum Alliance presence. Earth is now a signatory. Zeros regarded her in silence, his inner light cycling to a pale green. She couldn't tell if that meant irritation or resignation. He turned and gestured for her to follow. She fell in step, Kael pacing beside her like a shadow. As they walked, she could feel the glances behind her like heat against her back. Not one soldier here wanted her presence, and none of them could stop watching Kael. The barracks were Spartan, modular alloy structures half buried in sand to withstand the storms. Zeros stopped at a hatch and gestured. "This is yours. Minimal amenities. You will not be required in tactical briefings. Patrol duty only." She nodded, swallowing her pride. Understood. Before she stepped inside, she glanced at Kael. His ears twitched. He was listening, processing. She'd learned to trust that look. It meant something was wrong, even if the threat hadn't revealed itself yet. That night, Aria sat on her bunk, armor removed, her undershirt soaked with sweat. Kael lay sprawled near the hatch, one eye half open, tail still. Outside, night fell fast on Varnock 7, and the silence was nearly total. Only the wind whispered across the dunes. "You were right," she murmured, running a cloth over her gauntlet. "They didn't want us here. We're not soldiers to them. We're a threat." Kael made no sound, but she felt the low rumble in his chest. She thought back to the bonding protocols. When the Predator Synthesis Initiative launched, she'd been one of hundreds of candidates, most washed out in the neural compatibility phase. But she had synced with Kael almost immediately. He was unlike the other prototypes. He didn't just obey, he reasoned. He chose. She remembered the lab director's warning. He's too intelligent. He won't accept command. He'll partner, or nothing at all. And so they had become partners. A soft chime broke her thoughts. A message pinged across her visor display. Patrol route assignment. Outer Ridge, 0600 local time. The next morning, the desert was still cool when she stepped out with Kael. The garrison paid her little attention now, though a few Brocker watched Kael with guarded respect. The Outer Ridge was a jagged boundary of canyons and old mineral extractors long since abandoned. It was considered low risk. Boring. She welcomed it. They walked in silence for kilometers, the only sound their synchronized footfalls and the occasional click from her HUD as she logged anomalies. Kael roamed a few meters ahead, occasionally pausing to sniff the air or gaze out at the ridgeline. Suddenly, he stopped. His ears shot forward. Aria raised her rifle instinctively, scanning her display. Nothing. But Kael crouched low, shoulders rippling. "What is it?" she whispered, crouching beside him. His eyes locked with hers. No threat, but a presence. That's when she felt it too, barely a tremor through the soles of her boots. A subtle shift in air pressure. The feeling of being watched. She activated her visor's spectrum filters. Heat bloomed deep under the sand. Something was down there. She logged the coordinates and transmitted them back to base. No reply. Not even static. The link was dead. Kael circled the location, nose brushing the ground. Then he sat, gaze fixed on a patch of stone like it was a doorway. "We're not alone out here," she murmured. They made their way back in silence. No sign of pursuit, no obvious threat, but the sense of unease lingered like a scent in the wind. Later, in the mess hall, a Solaria officer approached her. Unusual. Most avoided her. "You call him, Kael," the Solari said, voice as calm as glass breaking. "He has the mind of a killer. He's never harmed an ally." "Not yet," the alien replied. "But he thinks. He feels." I tried to touch his thoughts once from a distance. Aria straightened. Without consent, I barely reached the edge of his awareness before I was pushed out. Not by force, by intent. Like a wall built just for me. She met the Solari's eyes. He knows who he is, and he knows who I am. And that's what frightens us. That night, a Brocker patrol commander attempted to provoke Kael. Aria had been outside the barracks, checking weapon calibration, when a large alien blocked her path. His voice was mocking, his stance wide. "You hide behind your beast, little human." Before she could answer, Kael moved. No growl, no warning, just a blur of gray and teeth and pressure. The Brocker found himself on the ground, Kael's jaws around his neck. Not biting, just holding. Absolute control. Dominance, not death. Then Kael released him and stepped back, tail flicking. The Brocker didn't rise immediately. When he did, it was with a grunt of acknowledgement, not anger. The outpost changed after that. No apologies. No formal acceptance. But the silence shifted. No more whispered insults. The commandant no longer avoided her. And the Brocker began to nod in her direction as she passed. Kael, as always, watched everything. 2 days later, the sandstorm came. It was sudden and unnatural, howling with a keening pitch that triggered Kael's hackles. As Aria sealed the barracks door and locked down her systems, she saw through the slit of her visor something, just a flicker, moving in the storm. Shapes, too coordinated for nature, too fluid for machines. Kael growled, deep and low, and turned to her. She didn't need words. Something had arrived, and it hadn't come for the outpost. It had come for him. The sandstorm had passed, leaving behind a sky smeared with ash-colored clouds and a brittle calm that clung to the outpost like dust. Aria stood atop the comms tower, visor off, letting the sting of wind chap her cheeks as she stared across the barren ridgelines. Kael was still, a gray sentinel beside her, tail low, ears pivoting with precise calculation. He hadn't stopped scanning the horizon since the storm broke. They hadn't discussed what she saw, what they both saw, shapes within the dust, moving against the wind, too deliberate to be illusions. The base's sensors hadn't registered anything, but Kael's instincts weren't shaped by machines. When he bristled like that, when his growl dropped into the lowest register of warning, Aria listened. The outpost's mood had soured since the storm. Commandant Zeros no longer pretended she didn't exist. He summoned her directly now, even if his tone was always clipped and his posture rigid with disdain. The Brocker kept their distance, no longer taunting but never welcoming. Only the Solari made any attempt at interaction, though even that was sparse and veiled in caution. She was tolerated, but Kael had shifted from curiosity to concern. He was no longer simply the human's predator. He had become a wild card in their fragile equilibrium. That morning, during her assigned perimeter sweep, Kael had veered off path, something he never did without purpose. Aria followed without hesitation. They moved silently between sharp-edged rocks, the sun casting jagged shadows that seemed to slice the terrain into fragments. Kael paused near a shallow ravine, sniffing a crack in the stone. Aria crouched beside him, brushing her gloved fingers over the rock surface. Faint scorch marks, not fresh but recent. She ran a scanner over it. Residual energy, irregular pulse signature. Not native tech, not Concord issue. Cloaked vessel, she muttered. Kael gave a quiet chuff. She logged the data, encrypted it, and didn't send it. Not yet. The silence from Central Command during the storm still unsettled her. It wasn't just comms interference. Something had jammed their systems, internally. Back at her quarters, she cleaned her weapon in silence while Kael rested, his breathing slow but eyes alert. Her thoughts kept returning to the weapon cache beneath the ridge, an ancient alien structure Kael had discovered during a training exercise 2 weeks earlier. At the time, she'd reported it as geological instability. She wasn't sure why she'd lied. Maybe it was instinct, the same kind Kael relied on. That structure hadn't been dormant. It had felt, waiting. There was a knock at her door, firm, rhythmic. She opened it to find the Solari linguist, Tavan, standing outside in his lacquered armor, hands clasped behind his back. He looked uncomfortable. "I require a word," he said, glancing briefly at Kael, who rose silently to his feet. Aria stepped aside. "Speak." Tavan entered without hesitation, his pale eyes never leaving Kael. "There's a rumor," he began, "among the Brocker ranks, that your companion is not entirely of your world. He's Terran-born," she said. "Grew up in the same facility I trained in. I do not mean biologically. I mean functionally." Kael patted closer, head tilted. Tavan swallowed once, then continued. "Before you arrived, the Brocker held dominance here. They respected strength, hierarchy. Your presence changed that. Kael changed that. They feel it. His presence distorts the natural chain." Aria crossed her arms. "Are you warning me?" Tavan hesitated. "I'm informing you. Something in this desert is moving beneath our feet. Old technology. Sentient, perhaps. The Solari have long believed Varnock. 7 was more than a staging ground." She considered his words, then asked, "Have you sensed anything? Through your gift?" Tavan looked uncomfortable. I reached out toward Kael again. I tried to be careful. And there was a door. Closed. Not locked, sealed. But this time, I heard something beyond it. A voice. Not his. Not yours. Older. Kael's hackles lifted. Aria's mind raced. Kael had always been selective in his interactions. His neural signature was known to be anomalous. He'd tested higher than baseline human cognition. But a voice? You think something others communicating through him. I think, Tavin said, voice low, that Kael is in resonance with something buried beneath this planet. And I think that's why the storm came. Before she could ask more, the outpost sirens erupted, sharp, rhythmic pulses of warning. Not a drill. She was already moving, armor half-strapped as Kael dashed ahead of her. On the central platform, Zeros stood rigid, Brocker soldiers forming ranks, weapons drawn and eyes locked toward the eastern approach. Aria followed their gaze. On the horizon, gliding over the sand with impossible silence, came a ship. It shimmered with cloaking residue, barely visible unless viewed from the right angle. It didn't bear Concord markings. It wasn't broadcasting any signal. "They're not here for us," she said under her breath. Kael's growl confirmed it. The ship settled, legs unfolding like the limbs of an insect. A hush fell across the garrison. The hatch opened. 3 figures emerged, tall, angular, armored in living metal that pulsed with color like a heartbeat. One of them carried a staff adorned with bone. Aria's blood ran cold. She knew them. Drovash, outlaws, genetic slavers, masters of biotech symbiosis. Their presence here violated Concord treaties. Zero spoke, voice taut. They claim diplomatic inquiry, that they seek a cultural emissary. "No," Aria said, stepping forward. "They're here for Kael." Zeros turned sharply. "You presume much, Lieutenant. They've tried this before. Earth's records show classified incidents, Drovash infiltrating predator research sites. They want Kael's genome, his neural design. He's a weapon to them." Kael stood unmoving, but she could feel the tension in him like wire drawn tight. "They asked for an audience," Zero said. "With you." Aria stiffened. "With me? And him." The interior of the Drovash ship reeked of ozone and organic decay. The walls breathed softly. Aria stood in the center of a circular chamber. Kael pressed to her side, every muscle coiled. Across from them stood the emissary, taller than she'd expected, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that seemed to pulse. "We do not come for conflict," it said, voice smooth layered. "We come to offer return." Aria frowned. "Return to what?" "To his kind." Kael growled, louder this time. The emissary remained unfazed. "He is not your creation," she said. "He is bonded to me. He chose Earth." The emissary tilted its head. "Incorrect. He woke on Earth. But he is older, built from something we lost eons ago. The link you share is real, but incomplete. Let him remember." It reached forward, fingers extending like tendrils. Kael didn't move. Aria did. She raised her sidearm. "Try that again, and we'll see who remembers what pain feels like." There was a pause, tense, electric. Then the emissary laughed. So protective, so very human. Aria backed out slowly, Kael never turning his back. When they reached the landing pad again, Zeros was waiting, unreadable. "They'll stay the night." "Concord protocol." "They won't wait long," she said. "They're hunting something. Something they think is in him." Zeros nodded once. "Then we must decide. Do we protect you, or hand you over?" That night, Aria didn't sleep. Kael stood at the entrance of her quarters, eyes fixed on the horizon. She sat beside him. "If they're right, if something in you is waking, what happens to us?" Kael didn't answer, but his gaze remained on the ridge, toward the buried structure they had never fully explored, toward whatever was calling them through stone, sand, and silence. The southern ridge loomed under a sliver of moonlight, its jagged silhouette rising like a broken tooth from the sand. Aria moved swiftly, crouched low, her steps light despite the weight of her gear. Behind her, Kael moved like shadow, silent, sure, muscle and thought merged into a predator's grace. The sandcrawler had been abandoned a kilometer back. They couldn't risk its engine signature drawing attention. If the Drovash or Concord were watching, this was their best chance at slipping unseen. Aria's lungs burned as she climbed. The ridge hadn't looked this steep before, but everything felt distorted now. Time, distance, the weight of their decision. Kael reached the summit first. He paused, waiting for her, amber eyes watching the stars as if reading the sky for signs. When she crested beside him, he brushed against her leg once. Reassurance, not uncertainty. Then he turned and led her down the hidden path toward the subterranean structure, where the first truth had waited all along. They arrived at the fissure in the rock, half-buried, glassy edges worn by centuries of storms. Aria crouched, running her hand across the smooth surface. Her fingers tingled at the contact, as if the stone itself had a pulse. She reached into her pouch, pulled out the portable reader, and tapped into the data she'd collected weeks ago during their first survey. The energy signature remained active, even stronger now. Kael circled the entrance, tail flicking, posture taut. Then, with a sudden movement, he struck the stone with his paw. A deep thrum vibrated through the ground. Lines of iridescent blue flared outward from the point of impact, racing across the rock like veins, and a low, harmonic tone filled the air. The entrance slid open with a groan of shifting metal. Aria swallowed her apprehension and stepped inside. The corridor beyond was dimly lit, walls lined with panels that shimmered faintly in response to Kael's presence. The air smelled sterile, preserved, not abandoned, waiting. Every step deeper into the structure felt like trespassing inside something alive. Kael's ears twitched, head tilting as though listening to a sound she couldn't hear. Occasionally, he would pause and glance back at her, eyes unreadable but attentive. They entered a chamber circular in shape, the ceiling high and domed, etched with constellations that shimmered with depthless light. At its center stood a raised platform surrounded by conduits spiraling inward like a vortex. It pulsed in sync with Kael's slow approach. Aria followed cautiously, senses screaming with anticipation and dread. As Kael stepped onto the platform, it responded. Lights surged through the room, cascading across the etched constellations. A holographic lattice unfurled above them, depicting a world map, but not one Aria recognized. Oceans, land masses, artificial constructs in orbit. A star chart shifted, then centered on a symbol identical to the one beneath Kael's feet. He sat deliberately, calmly, gaze lifted toward the projection. The hum deepened. Aria whispered, "Is this your origin?" The platform spoke, not in sound, but in sensation, thoughts, emotions, fragments of words woven into her mind like strands of memory. She staggered, gripping her head. Kael didn't move. The voice was not his. Prototype initiated, bond confirmed, synaptic fusion stabilized, : Her knees hit the floor. The words were ancient, carried in frequencies too low for normal cognition, but her link with Kael, strengthened over their time together, translated the meaning directly into her thoughts. It wasn't a message for her. It was about her. About them. Chosen apex, human vector achieved, predator consciousness tethered, : Kael turned then, eyes meeting hers. He didn't speak. He couldn't, but she knew what he meant. He was made not simply as a weapon, but as a bridge. His evolution had not ended with Earth. It had only begun. Aria's presence was part of it, not incidental but instrumental. The projection shifted, revealing images of Drovash vessels, Concord command posts, and genetic blueprints overlaid with Kael's neural patterns. He had been watched from the beginning. Earth had been one test site. Varnock, 7 another. Aria rose to her feet, heart pounding. They knew. The Drovash. maybe even the Concord. The structure began to react, walls shifting slightly, more conduits illuminating. Kael remained calm, centered, but Aria could see it in his posture. Something had been triggered. Not just memory, but function. The chamber wasn't just a beacon or a relic. It was a control hub. Her comm buzzed. She froze. No one should have had her signal. She tapped the side of her helmet. "Go!" Lieutenant Aria. Came Zero's voice, too calm to be genuine. "Return to the outpost immediately. You've entered a restricted structure of pre-Concord origin. Your actions have triggered a planetary failsafe. We are containing the response." She laughed bitterly. "Contain it? You mean bury it? Like you buried the others." A pause. "We can still protect you. But the creature must be surrendered. This is larger than one bond." Kael rose, muscles tense, eyes locked on her. He could hear the voice too. She was sure of it. He was listening, weighing options, not out of fear, but instinct. She switched off her comm. "They're going to come," she said. "They'll try to destroy this place before they let it rewrite their control." Kael stepped toward her. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the chamber around them alive with purpose. He pressed his forehead lightly to hers, a gesture they'd shared since their earliest training days. Trust unspoken. Aria breathed out. "Then we make a choice." She turned toward the central node, laid her palm on the core panel. Access. The room dimmed, then flared with impossible light. Information streamed past her in blinding cascades. Symbols, sequences, languages older than Earth's atmosphere. Her vision blurred. Somewhere in her mind, she felt Kael enter the stream alongside her. Together, they opened the next layer. A starfield unfolded. Thousands of systems, each marked with faint beacons. Kael's genetic map stretched across them like a cipher. The Drovash hadn't just been searching for him. They'd been searching for what he could unlock. And now he was unlocking it. The structure began to quake, not collapsing, but shedding layers. It was preparing for activation. Aria stumbled backward. Kael moved to her side instantly, bracing her. Above them, the hologram shimmered, and a symbol pulsed, a single planetary coordinate, deep in uncharted space. A pulse signal was sent. Not a weapon. A call. She looked up at Kael, voice hoarse. "You're not just a predator." He blinked slowly, then growled once. Not a warning. An answer. Footsteps echoed behind them, distant, armed, urgent. The outpost had mobilized. Aria looked toward the ramp, heart hammering. "We're not going back." Kael crouched, ready. She raised her weapon and took position beside him, eyes locked on the only entrance. The chamber responded, sealing behind them, not to trap, but to protect, as if the structure had made its choice too. And somewhere, far beyond the ridge, the stars began to change. The ramp sealed behind them with a low hum, not in warning, but with finality. Aria stood with her weapon lowered, eyes scanning the chamber once more, trying to commit every detail to memory. The projections above had dimmed to a slow rotation of stars, as if the structure itself had fallen into contemplation. Kael remained near the central node, his eyes half closed, breathing steady, though his muscles were still taut beneath his scaled frame. He was absorbing something she could only begin to comprehend. More than data, more than commands. Purpose. Outside, she knew the Concord forces had formed a perimeter. Drovash bow sentinels would be advancing now, silent and swift. Their directive would be precise. Extract the human, neutralize the asset. But Aria no longer felt like an asset, nor Kael like a weapon. They were something else now. Something born of the old stars and reforged in fire. She stepped toward him, eyes searching his face. "What happens if we stay here?" Kael tilted his head, a low rumble emanating from his chest. He blinked slowly, then turned his attention toward the panel behind him. A glyph lit beneath his claw. Another projection sprang to life, this one showing the structure's outer hull, the buried sections beginning to awaken. Subterranean systems stirred, their deep energy signatures rippling out like sonar pulses. The planet was responding. Or maybe it had simply been waiting for someone like him to return. A voice broke through the silence, sharper than before, urgent. "Aria, respond. This is Captain Harvin of the Concord Perimeter Team. You are in violation of Treaty Article 6. Exit the structure immediately and surrender the creature. You're not authorized to initiate contact-level protocols." She didn't answer. Not this time. She looked to Kael, who simply stared at the map as more symbols aligned, charting a new course across space, far beyond the mapped Concord sectors. He raised his paw again, and the chamber's walls vibrated softly. A circular device lifted from the floor near Aria's feet. It unfolded into what resembled a personal interface console, though more advanced than anything she had ever seen. Symbols appeared above it, language she didn't speak but could almost feel. She stepped forward and laid her hand across the interface. The surface responded to her touch, displaying a compressed archive, pages of neural telemetry, genetic drift, environmental interaction. Her own biodata was in there, mapped and overlaid against Kael's. Not surveillance, synchronization. Their journey had been observed, not just by the Concord or the Drovash, but by this place. It had judged them fit. A loud thud shook the outer corridor. They were breaching. Kael's ears flicked back, and he moved between Aria and the entrance again, his body coiled, a low growl resonating from his throat. But she could see he wasn't angry. He was resolved. They wouldn't fight unless they had to. Not because they couldn't win, but because there was more at stake than survival. She activated the interface. The ceiling flared again. This time, the star map condensed into a single pulse point. A gate. An exit. Somewhere unreachable by conventional means. It wasn't escape. It was evolution. A new voice came through the comm. One she didn't expect. "Aria, this is Tavin. Don't reply, just listen." Her breath caught. She recognized the background static. He was inside the Concord command rig. "I don't know what you found down there, but they're afraid of it. More than they're afraid of Kael. Orders have shifted. This is no longer an extraction. It's a purge. They're authorizing planetary cleansing protocols. You have less than 7 minutes before they detonate the ridge." Kael looked at her sharply, sensing the spike in her adrenaline. She stepped back to the central node. "We're not staying." He placed his pawn next to her hand, their points of contact initiating the sequence. The chamber responded, aligning the glyphs in quick succession. One by one, massive conduits retracted, revealing a central cradle at the heart of the room. Light poured from it, coalescing into a portal of rotating energy. It wasn't just a door. It was a transfer, a dimensional vector aimed beyond the Concord's reach. Aria stared at it, heart racing. "Is this where you came from?" Kael glanced at her. Then he nodded. She didn't ask what was on the other side. She didn't need to. Whatever waited beyond the veil, it was part of him. And now part of her. The entrance behind them exploded inward. Shouts echoed, boots striking stone. Aria raised her weapon, not to fire but to buy time. Kael turned to her, eyes gleaming. Then he did something he'd never done before. He leaned forward and pressed his snout gently against her forehead, the contact featherlight. It was more than instinct. It was goodbye. Or maybe just go. She turned back toward the portal and stepped in. Light engulfed her, weightless, warm, infinitely vast. For a moment she saw everything. Star systems blinking like neurons. Threads of possibility unraveling. Paths carved through cosmic storms. She felt Kael beside her, his presence anchoring her through the current. Then the structure vanished. From orbit, the southern ridge erupted in a blinding column of white fire. The Concord fleet withdrew immediately, mission flagged as failed containment. Drovash reports were sealed. The tribunal never reconvened. But across unmarked sectors, deep beyond Concord space, signals began to ripple through the dark. Messages in a language not spoken aloud, responding to the one who had returned. And in the quiet expanse of a distant world, beneath a sky with unfamiliar stars, Aria awoke. Kael sat beside her, watching the horizon, his eyes reflecting something new. Something awake. She sat up, the air cool against her skin, the gravity unfamiliar but gentle. The sky was violet gold, twin moons rising. She looked at him, and he met her gaze. "Where are we?" she asked softly. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. They were home, not by birth, by choice.